Looking over the upper part of the Schoharie Valley from the dance floor, as they call it, on top of Roman's Nose. The Schoharie Creek is on our left, and I'm looking at the Barber Farm, which is the site of the upper fort during the Revolution. This fort was built around the home of Johannes Feek, who was one of the wealthier men in the area, whose daughter Peggy, or Margaret, would eventually marry Timothy Murphy. But in the fall of 1777, the house was fortified as one of 3 forts in the valley. This was in the upper part. Because the Schoharie Creek runs from south to north, the upper part is actually to the south. So 3 forts were built. The upper fort here, about a mile or so south of here. Then there was a middle fort, about where Middleburg is today, about 2 miles north of here. And about 5 miles north of that was the lower fort, which is now the old stone fort. So the upper fort was a little different than the other forts. The other 2 forts were essentially a stone building surrounded with a strong stockade of pine logs side by side with loopholes in them. The upper fort had 3 sides that were more like a formal and more substantial fort, where you had 2 walls with about 12 feet or so of earth, well rammed inside, well packed. It was wide. The tops were wide enough that you could draw a wagon on it. Why they did this instead of just a stockade is anybody's guess. One side was a stockade. If I was to speculate, it would be that this was the first one that was built, and they took so much time, effort, money, and manpower to make the 3 sides that they decided that they didn't really need that much as far as fortifications go. The only thing we really had to worry about was musket fire and maybe small artillery, which would be ineffective for the most part against a strong stockade. So speculation would have that they just abandoned doing it this way for not only this fort, for the last wall, but also for the other forts. Just a guess. So not too many events happened at the fort. It was bypassed by Sir John Johnson and his loyalist corps of British allies on October 17, 1780. Johnson crossed the creek about 1/3 of a mile or so south of the upper fort, but of course his rear guard was noticed by someone out milking cows. So the alarm gun goes off and it warns the middle fort, and then the middle fort warns the lower fort. That's the way it happens, by the cannon fire. And at that point, Johnson started burning the valley across the creek on the east side at the home of Hendrik Matthijs. So if you go on the Clover Y, you'll see a sign there about that, not too far from here. Now the upper fort was commanded by Captain Jacob Hager, who had an excellent reputation as a good military man and a commanding officer. But other than that, the fort was never attacked. There were certainly scouts went out from the upper fort. Hager seems to have directed their footsteps so that they would go in concentric circles out and around the countryside, trying to find signs of the enemy. So there was a lot of activity at the upper fort. Eventually Timothy Murphy would come on one of his scouts and meet Peggy Feek, and eventually they would get married by 1780.